Good morning. I'll call to order the regular meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee. Today is September 29th, 2016. I'm Lisa Bender. I chair the committee. We have a quorum with Council Members Reich, Goodman, Andrew Johnson, and Council President Johnson. Today we have 6 items on our agenda. We have 3 items for public hearing, 2 items on our consent agenda, and then a 6th item that is for discussion at the end. We'll begin with the 2 items on consent. That's item number 4, which is passage of an ordinance amending our zoning code related to our parkland dedication fees. And item number 5, which is referring to staff and ordinance amending our zoning code for floodplain regulations and maps consistent with the requirements of the National Flood Insurance Program. Does anyone want to pull those off or discuss items 4 or 5? All right, I will move items 4 and 5. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Those carry. That brings us to the first item on our public hearing agenda. We'll start with the staff presentation. This is an interim use permit at 2 Dowling Avenue North.
Good morning, council members. This is an interim use permit for Ramsey Excavating to allow a concrete, asphalt, and rock crushing facility on the property located at 2 Dowling Avenue North. This is the northern parcel that makes up the Upper Harbor Terminal site. In October of last year, the City Council approved an interim use permit to allow the applicant to operate a temporary crushing facility on the property, and that permit expires October 9th of this year. The applicant is here today to request an extension to that permit to the end of December of 2017. The applicant has been stockpiling aggregate products on the site for some time, and then for the past year has been crushing those products. No complaints have been received by the city in the past year. We are recommending approval of this request subject to conditions of approval related to dust, erosion control, and noise, which are the same conditions that were placed on the permit last year. And that is all that I have this morning. I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff before we open the public hearing? No. So we'll go ahead and open the public hearing. Would anyone like to speak on item number 1? Would anyone like to speak? Last call. Seeing none, we will close the public hearing. Council President.
Madam Chair, I will move approval of the conditional use, interim use permit, and just say that we have worked very closely with staff and Ramsey Excavating to make sure that this timeline for being able to use this land concurs with the plans that we have for the Upper Harbor. It's been an interesting exercise in finding out just how much of a need we have for industrial land in the city of Minneapolis. There's great demand for the land that we have available. We had a developers meeting a few weeks ago, and 61 people expressed interest in the Upper Harbor. So we know we're going to have some development proposals. They will be due in October. So we know that this timeline can fit with what happens with the Upper Harbor. We know practically we're not going to see any construction next year, probably the year after. So thanks, great work with staff and Ms. Ann Calvert, who's been just a great shepherd of working on this project. So I'll move approval.
Thank you. Have a motion for approval. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that carries. Item number 2, our 4th item, is a conditional use permit and variance appeal for 200 Central Avenue Southeast, the Alatis project, and we'll begin with a staff presentation as well. How many people would like to speak during the public hearing on this item? Okay, thank you.
Good morning, Chair Bender, committee members. This project you've seen before, it hasn't changed much since you last heard the appeals for the Heritage Preservation Commission applications. So we're looking at the properties at 200 Central Southeast and 113 2nd Street Southeast, Just to recap on what's proposed here, we have a mixed-use building, ground floor retail proposed, 214 dwelling units. Again, the retail will be fronting along Central. We have our residential entrance off of 2nd, the 4-story base, and then the tower above. So the Planning Commission did approve all the applications related to this project, but the appeal before you is just for the conditional use permit for height and the floor area ratio variance. And so the height increase is requested to go from 4 stories, 56 feet that would be allowed in the C2 district to 42 stories, 483 feet. And that height in feet is measured to the top of the highest point of the building, that decorative parapet. The 42 stories includes a mechanical penthouse and an elevator overrun. So for the most part, the building has 40 levels, but when you add on the penthouse and the overrun, you end up at 42 stories under the zoning code. And then the floor area ratio is requested to be increased from 2.04, which was what's allowed in the C2 district with the parking density bonus, up to 14.42. So I'll just go through the findings that were made for the conditional use permit and the FAR variance. The Planning Commission did adopt the staff findings. So it was found that the proposal is consistent with the comprehensive plan. This site, this site is located in the East Hennepin Activity Center. And in this location, the growth is guided for up to 800 densities or dwelling units per acre. And that's supported in this area because it's near the downtown growth center. And what's proposed on the site is 268 dwelling units per acre. The site also falls within the boundaries of the Marcy Homes Neighborhood Master Plan. That's a small area plan that was adopted recently. And this small area plan indicates that the higher density residential development is appropriate in this location because of its location on a transit and transportation corridor and near a commercial center. The future land use is also guided for mixed use in this area. That's something supported by the C2 commercial district. But to achieve the desired density in this location, an FAR increase and a height increase would be needed. And then moving on to some of the surrounding context. There's a mix of uses in this area. It's also in a historic district. So most directly adjacent to this property would be the Pillsbury Library to the north. That's a contributing building in the historic district. To the east is the St. Anthony parking ramp. That's a 9-level parking ramp, takes up half of the block here. To the south across 2nd Street would be the Winslow condominiums. That's a 12-story building. And then to the east, the closest properties are 2-story townhouse structures, and then Chute Square kind of to the northwest. But generally in this area, there's a mix of sizes of buildings from 1 to 26 stories in height. And staff did note that the requested increase is a pretty substantial deviation from what would be allowed in the C2 district. But in looking at that surrounding context, and I'll go give some examples, it is compatible with the surrounding area. So again, the parking ramp at 9 levels, that's 98 feet in height. The Winslow House condos to the south is 180 feet in height, and just over about a block away to the west is the Reeve condominiums, and that height is 310 feet. So we do have other examples of very tall structures with a larger scale. The proposed building also breaks up its massing to reduce adverse impacts. Thank you. The base is a 4-story podium, and that takes up most of the site. The top of that podium is just under 60 feet as measured to the parapet. And that base is also oriented to the adjacent streets, 2nd Street and Central Avenue. And then looking at the tower itself, that footprint is half of the podium, so much smaller footprint for the site. It's set back from the streets, and it's over 30 feet from the adjacent Pillsbury Library, those upper stories. On the first floor, it is built up to the lot line, but they've recessed the upper stories. So we have a pretty significant separation. So with those setbacks, it was determined that the access to light and air surrounding properties would be maintained. We also looked at shadowing, and it was determined that those shadowing impacts would not be significant given the context of the area. No one property would be shadowed throughout the day. It won't be significantly shadowing any other properties more than some of the other buildings in the area as well. We also looked at the preservation of views of landmark buildings, significant open spaces and water bodies, again, finding that the impact would not be significant. With the Pillsbury Library to the north, some views of that building would obviously be impeded because it's only a one and a half story building or so. But even if you were to construct a 4-story building, which would be allowed by the district, the same view would be impeded. So the additional height wouldn't have additional impacts there. Chute Square I mentioned, that's part of the historic district, and the Mississippi River is about 2 blocks away. We looked at any possible impacts there, and in the historic district, no significant views were identified that would be impeded by this building to those significant landmarks and water bodies. We've also looked at the traffic impacts and determined that adequate measures would be taken to minimize traffic congestion in the streets. They've, as proposed, would be meeting and exceeding vehicle and bicycle and loading requirements. The residential parking would have 389 spaces. That includes some tandem spaces. The restaurant would be parked over, they do valet, and be parked over in the adjacent parking ramp. And there's some additional short-term parking that would be located along the street for visitors and patrons of the restaurant. This is also an area that has very convenient access to other modes of transportation. Just at the corner of Central and University, there's access to 22 transit routes. Also, this is right on a bike network. It's very well connected here. It's a very walkable area. There's lots of services and amenities nearby. And the applicant did complete a draft TDMP. It's very close to being finalized. Again, it was concluded that the proposed development wouldn't have any significant impacts on traffic operations. They've also are proposing to implement some strategies, designating a transportation corridor coordinator for the building, having a real-time transit screen in their lobby, things like that, and also charging for some parking spaces. So when you buy your unit, you'd also have to buy a parking space in addition to that, and wouldn't just come with it. Lastly, one other thing, with the findings, there was no issue with determining that there would be adequate utilities, access, and other facilities for the proposal. Public Works has looked at it and not identified any major issues. And just with the Planning Commission and their review, they did reiterate a lot of points that were made in the findings, but they also did note some other things that I'll mention. They've noted that we don't only have tall buildings in downtown. Additional density is needed to support transit. They also noted that the way they've designed the building, that it's mitigating the increased bulk and that the base of the building is oriented towards pedestrians. So just to recap, just given the the policy guidance that we have, and for higher density here, the context of the area, and that the way the project is designed, it was determined that the proposal would not have significant effects on surrounding properties, and that the height and FAR increases would be reasonable. That concludes my presentation. I can take any questions.
Are there any questions for staff? There are not. Okay. And as you noted, this is the 4th presentation and public hearing we've had about this project. So we have a full record from those, as well as the full appeal in our packets and available to council members. So with that, I'll open the public hearing. We will begin with the applicant and then those who are here to speak in favor of the project. And then we will turn to the appellant, those who've appealed, and those who are here to speak against the project. There'll be time at the end if anyone doesn't fit neatly into those categories. So I would like the applicant to please come up. So for each side, if you will, I'd like to ask you to stick to 10 or 15 minutes for the main presentation, and then each member of the public will have 2 minutes to speak. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam Chair, Commission members. My name is Bob Lux. I'm with Alatus, 201 South 11th Street in downtown Minneapolis. I live. We have been before you numerous times before. I will make my remarks brief. I really want to touch on 3 items. First of all, why we chose to build this building or want to propose to build this building in this location. And then secondly, kind of the justification in what we're trying to do to mitigate the issues of doing a 40-story tower in this location. First of all, 2 years ago when we became interested in the site and put it under contract, we reached out to numerous stakeholders in the neighborhood as well as within the community. Our first proposal was to do a taller apartment building of approximately 390 units. After numerous discussions with a lot of the city staff, stakeholders within the Marcy Homes and the Nicollet Island neighborhood, as well as the kind of community at large, I can put it, we were really persuaded to do condominiums. Condos, as you all know, as the community knows, is a difficult lift for a developer to do because of the liabilities associated with them and the demands from the buyers of what they need to attract them to a site. The site is actually perfect for a condominium buyer because of the amenities that are in the area. As Janelle and staff have mentioned, the walkability scores on this site are probably the best in the entire city, and the transit availability is tremendous. But also it offers the opportunities for not only move-up buyers or move-up renters that would become buyers that are currently living in downtown to move and stay in downtown Minneapolis, but also for us to attract buyers from the suburban locations or from outside of our metro area. And one of the things that I've always focused on in our developments that we get involved with is how do we have a holistic view to our community. And to have a holistic view, we have to attract people that manage and run and own larger companies that want to have an opportunity to live in a building such as the one that we're proposing. So that is one of the biggest moves that we made initially in this, was to go to a condominium structure. The second one was working with Marcy Homes. And Marcy Homes really wanted us to be respectful to the heritage of the neighborhood by doing a podium that is not representative of the 1900s, but one that reflects the surrounding buildings, which is really led by the Pillsbury Library. It's a limestone structure, but we also have to deal with a 9-story parking garage that is probably one of the ugliest structures that is built in the city of Minneapolis. The entire base of the building that we're building has a limestone facade on it. And it's very unique. ESG, the architectural firm, is the one that has been involved with the entire design of this building, and we believe they've done an excellent job of working with the pedestrian experience and really integrating it into a historic neighborhood. The tower is a point tower. It's slender. It's from a footprint size, it's approximately 12,000 square feet, which in comparison to the Carlisle, which is almost 14,000 square feet, it's 15% less in size and scale than what the Carlisle would be. There's some metrics that you have to work out because of the core of those buildings that you can't go smaller than that and make them work. And the third thing is really how do we make it so that the residents that move into this building also integrate into the neighborhood. And the price ranges of these units will there'll be units that'll sell for over $1 million, but the units will also start in the $300,000 range too. So there's going to be a wide variety of price ranges, and we believe that it actually, once they're built, the buildings like this really do integrate well. And the height of the building, once you're up over 15 or 20 stories, the height of the building really does not affect the neighborhood. So we believe that we're in compliance with the comp plan for the city of Minneapolis in the high activity area that we're located. And we're just very excited about being able to start this project and move forward. I'm available for any questions at any time.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for the applicant? The attorney come up.
Good morning, council members. I'm Carol Lansing, attorney at Faegre Baker Daniel, also working with the applicant here. I just want to add a few remarks regarding the findings that you need to make. Earlier this week, I submitted a letter that goes through each of the findings for the CUP invariance, and I won't go through all of those again in this testimony, but wanted to focus on a couple of key issues. First, the land use guidance for this site. The appeal argues that the height and the FAR of the project and the very high density development that height and FAR allows are not consistent with the comprehensive plan and the small area plan. They acknowledge that the comprehensive plan now says that very high density up to 800 dwelling units per acre may be appropriate in activity centers near growth centers as consistent with applicable small area plans, and this project is in an activity center near the downtown growth center. The project will have 268 dwelling units per acre. But the appeal goes on to make two inaccurate statements regarding land use guidance. The first is that they state that the site is guided commercial and that commercial areas are generally not intended for residential or high density residential. That's inaccurate. With the adoption of the small area plan, the Marcy Homes plan, the guidance for this site has been changed to mixed use. It's not commercially guided. The second error is that they say that the small area plan guides it for high density residential and that high density residential caps out at no more than 120 dwelling units per acre. That's also inaccurate. This is the future land use map for the Marcy Homes small area plan. I don't know if you can zoom in, but this parcel right here is where the project site that's pink, that's guided mixed use. These parcels to the southeast are guided for high density residential. The small area plan has no limits or discussion about maximum density on mixed use guided parcels. And this is also relevant to concerns that have been raised about the precedential nature of this decision. There's concern about potential future redevelopment of this area, which is the General Mills properties. So this plan does have specific guidance for high density, so more in the up to 120 dwelling unit per range. So the Alatus project will not be precedent for these sites. They have different land use guidance, but just to repeat, there is no limit on density in either the comp plan or the small area plan. The guidance does support and is consistent in both plans with the very high density that's proposed. The other comprehensive plan, they go through other comprehensive plan policies. I just want to note that the ones related to historic preservation have been decided by this council when you approve the certificate of appropriateness. I'd also like to briefly address the standards for practical difficulties for the variance. The variance requires a finding of practical difficulty in complying with the strict letter of the ordinance. There's a statute that creates this practical difficulty standard, and one of the key principles of that statute is that the variance be found to be consistent with the comprehensive plan. One of the reasons there can be, so this acknowledges that you can have a project that doesn't meet the strict letter of the ordinance, but is consistent with the comprehensive plan, and that's very relevant to a finding of practical difficulties. And one of the reasons that mismatch can happen is because the zoning code doesn't regulate on a parcel by parcel basis. And so having the flexibility, the ability to address through variance inconsistencies with comprehensive plan goals is a legitimate, important, and regularly applied practice in this city. Also, as discussed in the staff report and our submissions, there are the combination of land use features and policies that apply to this site are unique because they don't apply to C2 zone property throughout the city. And Janelle has gone through those policies with you. With respect to the magnitude of the height and the variance, the magnitude, whether you put it into some percentage or some number of stories difference, the magnitude is not relevant if the outcome, if the result is reasonable, because the standard also requires a finding of reasonableness. And both the height and the FAR of this project are reasonable and meet the required findings, primarily because they are compatible with the character of the area. Over the years, there's been several tall and very tall buildings built in the East Hennepin area, a new 21-story building is under construction now on the Superior Plating site. And nor are is the application in terms of their magnitude before you breaking new ground. Recently, the city approved a 26-story building with a 11.1 FAR at 600 Washington. That was actually approved on consent at the Planning Commission. And it is located in an activity center just next to the University Growth Center and was found to be compatible with character. So, again, I'm here for questions. The architects are here if you have questions about the design of the building. And we request that you do deny the appeal and approve the project.
Thank you. Any questions? We have none. So we'll go ahead and ask anyone from the public who would like to speak in favor of the project to please come up, state your name and address for the record, and we'll have 2 minutes per person. And again, the two issues before us today are the conditional use permit for height and the FAR variance. All of the other issues have already been acted on.
Thank you. My name is Arvon Fraser. I'm a former president and chair of the Land Use Committee of the Marcy Homes neighborhood area, and I obviously rise as a supporter of this program. Though when I still lived in Marcy Homes, this project was not before us, but we were very aware of the site. While I was chair, we worked on the historic A-Mill project and much of the development along Main Street and in Dinkytown. We worked on this. The basis was the city plan for diversity and sustainability and diversity in housing, and we're also aware of we needed an increase in the tax base, which this will do. My view is that the very modern buildings such as the Cobalt and the proposed Lattice here adds to the historic atmosphere of a building. I mean, of an area. Just across the street from the proposed building, well, next to it, of course, is the historic Pillsbury Library, but across the street is the one of the first buildings in the city, situated on a little park, so that we do have a sense of the history of the neighborhood. But the argument is that the more modern and high-rise developments actually accent and help make this or advertise it as a historic neighborhood. So I come urging approval of the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak in favor of this project? Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Victor Gramsch. I live at 132 Bank Street Southeast, about a half a block from the site. I normally appear before you as president of the Nicolet East Bank Neighborhood Association. Today I am not. I am speaking in my official capacity. NEBNA has not made any findings about this project. As someone said, I think as you said earlier, this is the fourth time through the project, and I think it's worth reviewing that in response to the EQB matter, the finding of fact was that this project is in compliance with the city, with the comprehensive plan. And of course, the HPC matters have been dealt with by having a certificate of appropriation has already been issued, and so those matters are brought up. So now we're looking, are dealt with. So now we're looking at an appeal of these two matters from the Planning Commission, the approval of the Planning Commission. And I just note that the purpose of the zoning code is, the prime purpose is, quote, to implement the policies of the comprehensive plan. Okay, it is not the purpose of the zoning code to thwart the purposes of the comprehensive plan. So now we have a building that is known to be in compliance with the plan and with the heritage preservation guidelines in the area. So now we have an issue for height. In this site, and I think many sites in the city, 56 feet is a limit. At any building, anywhere exceeding that limit, needs to have a conditional use permit. And the rules under which the conditional use permit are issued are basically qualitative. They're not quantitative. As a matter of fact, there's no maximum limit specified in the approval process for conditional units for height, and that very large increases over the threshold level have been approved in this neighborhood at buildings like Cobalt and Larive and Pinnacle and Falls. I also note that a relatively comparable building, LPM Tower over in Loring Park, which is a neighborhood in some ways similar to ours. Certainly we based some of our small area plan on the Loring Park experience. The approval was from 35 feet because of the shoreline district to 376 feet, 10 times the limit. So I think the idea that a large increase in height is not unknown in the city and is fairly common. I think much the same analysis would go for the floor area ratio, that there are standards that have to be met, but those standards don't specify any kind of limits. And I can say that my experience with the city over 15 years is you know how to write detailed regulations when you want to. And if you wanted to have either a maximum height or you wanted to have different standards for different levels of variance, you certainly have the capability of doing that, at least with regard to neighborhood association policies.
Could you complete your remarks?
Yes, okay. And so as the speaker of this project, I think this project has had more than adequate review, and I do think that it does, in fact, enhance the neighborhood and meet the needs of the plan for sustainability and for growth. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak in favor of the project against the appeals? Okay, there'll still be time at the end if anyone changes their mind. With that, I would like to ask the folks who've appealed the project to please begin with a similar presentation, and then we'll have 2 minutes for each member of the public. Thank you.
Good morning. Committee members, Chair Bender, my name is Bill Griffith, representing the Neighbors for East Bank Livability. By now, I'm probably a familiar face. There's been a lot of hearings as referenced by the other testifiers. And yet this is probably and is the most important hearing. Why? Because this will ultimately decide the approval of the project. And I want to correct a couple statements to begin with. First of all, the issues of historic preservation and environmental protection and sustainability were not left behind in those other hearings. When your regulations or variance or conditional use permit reference consistency with the comprehensive plan, they bring all those issues back in. All those issues are within this record, and that's why we included in the record all those prior discussions and reports. So just to put it on the record, when you, consistent with state law, reference consistency with the comprehensive plan, you bring back to life all of those policies for this discussion. So that's point number one. Point number two, and it goes to a statement that Developers Council made at the last hearing, that the variance is necessary to sort out a mishmash of policies and plans that affect the development of this site. First of all, I don't know if I'd characterize your well-crafted plans as policies as a mishmash. I hope they're not a mishmash. But more importantly, the way you, if there are conflicting policies, and there are contradictory policies in your comprehensive plan. It's a little like the Bible. You can find a passage for any proposition you want to take. But the way you sort through those contradictory plans, is by implementing your comprehensive plan through zoning controls. And so therefore, our most important point today is if the city wanted to give this site a free pass on height and density as it relates to your zoning controls, the legal regulations that are operative on this site, then your charge was under the Metropolitan Land Planning Act to amend those controls. Because that's how we know when there's a tie or there's a conflict or a contradictory policy, that's how we know what you intended for this site. You didn't do that hard work. You can still do that hard work if you so choose. It will require you to think comprehensively about this site and its zoning and other C2 zone sites in the city. But to say that we can just take this policy or this plan and apply it to this project but not another is the height of arbitrary decision making. And I think that's what we want you to avoid here. Because we as residents of this community know that you will be challenged on the next site and the next site and the next site. And different arguments will be brought to bear Other concerns will be raised, but ultimately, it's the integrity of the decision-making that's at issue here. The integrity of the decision-making is at issue. Mr. Lux does very, very nice projects. We know that. Primarily, he's done them in the downtown core, but elsewhere. He's done very large projects, very dense projects in the downtown core, as your policies and plans suggest. Now we're over on the East Bank. Now we'd like to do something of downtown scale on the East Bank. And your planning staff has suggested that that's allowed by this review of the plans and policies and codes and how they all work together. But we still find over 20 policies within the comprehensive plan that contradict this project. So how do you sort that out? You sort that out through your zoning controls. And many of the planners in the room would understand day one, comprehensive planning, zoning, the plan is guidance. The plan is forward-looking. The plan is about the future of the city. And what you do to regulate land is you amend your official controls, the zoning ordinance. We don't get to construct this really complicated web that only you, the city council, decides on a case-by-case basis. It should be held up consistently, equally, uniformly to each and every project. And therefore, I should be able to, on the next parcel that's guided, zoned, and planned in the same way, build a 42 or maybe a 50-story tower. I'm not sure. I'm not really sure when I come in and file an application in this city what I will be able to build until I go through this process. And that's the arbitrary nature of granting a variance where there are no special circumstances. Now, you've heard staff and developers council say the special circumstances arise from the confluence of plans and policies and regulations that restrict the development of this property. But that is not the basis for a variance. The basis for a variance under Minnesota law are special circumstances unique to the property that are not based on economic considerations alone, that create a hardship. Are you telling me that if Mr. Lux were to build an 8-story tower consistent with the historic guidelines, that would be a hardship on this site? I don't think so. I don't think you can make that case. Are you telling me that he has woodlands or wetlands or steep slopes or some special character of this property, highly erodible soils that make this so unique that we cannot apply the zoning controls that you've adopted to this site? No, I don't think that's the case either. What we have here, council members, is a case of something we like. We like Mr. Lux, we like his projects, and we don't want to do the hard work of amending the zoning controls to create that kind of consistency between planning and zoning that should be operating on this site. And so the result is a 600% increase. I think that is a warning sign. We were told that we shouldn't be concerned about the magnitude. That also is Planning 101. If a planner sits in the first day of their planning school, they're going to say, if you have a minimal variance that protects the neighborhood is in keeping with the spirit and intent of the ordinance, you're probably okay. As the needle moves and red lines to 600%, folks, that should be a warning sign to you that you've essentially set aside that regulation. Go ahead and amend the code. You have the discretion. You know that. You have the discretion to amend the code, but that will require hearings. That will require you to make sure that it's consistent with your comprehensive plan. That will invite others in your community into the conversation about whether this should happen here, there, or elsewhere. But we're not doing that. We're giving this developer, excuse the expression, a political favor. That's what it is. If it's not based on law, it's a political favor to this developer because, hey, he's got a good track record. Do we really want our zoning controls to be used and abused based upon whether we like the developer and like what they're proposing? I don't think so. I don't think that's the correct use of land use and zoning. It really undermines the integrity of the process and the trust that these people, my clients, have for you in this room. And I know it's making us all uncomfortable to hear these words, but folks, if I don't say it today, it's going to be said in another forum, and you're going to hear it eventually. Maybe not for this project, maybe for the next project, but ultimately you're going to have to come to grips with the truth of the matter. And I hate to be, kind of in your face. I'd like us all to, feel like we've accomplished something good here. but we have to present this truthfully, honestly, and with the integrity that my clients expect. Now, ultimately, you are the decision maker in this case. But ultimately, it sets a precedent. And the reason it sets a precedent is because if there is no special circumstance for granting this variance, then anybody can meet the standard. That's the nature of a variance. So with that, I will close. The record is hundreds of pages long. I don't need to go on at length, but I think you understand what we're saying here. If you don't follow your own rules, if you don't follow state law in amending your code to match your plan, to really say what you mean can be done here, then you have circumvented the law. You have given a political favor to a developer you like and a project you like, and you've undermined your own zoning scheme. Thank you.
Okay. Any questions? We'll go ahead then and allow anyone from the public who'd like to speak to please come up. Welcome you to state your name and address for the record. If you haven't signed in with the clerk before speaking, please do so after you speak. Welcome.
Good morning, members of the Zoning and Planning Committee. My name is Eric Wunderlich. I live in the Marcy Homes neighborhood at 413 5th Street Southeast, which is a single-family home in the Southeast 5th Street Historic District. And I'm here today to speak on behalf of Neighbors for East Bank Livability, an expanding grassroots group of folks living in the Marcy Homes, Nicollet Island, East Bank, other East Bank neighborhoods, and now neighborhoods across the city that are concerned about what's going on here. And I speak in support of Neighbors for East Bank Livability's appeal of the City Planning Commission's approval of a conditional use permit, increasing the maximum allowed height for a building by 750% from 4 stories to 42 stories, and a zoning variance allowing a 600% increase in maximum floor area ratio from 2.04 to 14.42. The Minneapolis City Council does not have legal authority to make legislative changes on a piecemeal basis, which is effectively what's being attempted here. While they do have latitude to make exceptions under certain circumstances, in this case, all bounds of reasonable discretion are broken. And I ask you to reflect on some potential consequences should this project go forward as proposed. Similarly zoned properties across the city could suddenly have land values exceeding 10 times the value of existing improvements. Why would owners bother to maintain properties that have the potential for that kind of payday? Why would any developer pursue moderate priced housing on these properties when they could make that kind of money